The moment I opened that door, I felt it, like the air shifted against me, like the world tilted just enough to warn me I didn't belong there. The hallway behind me smelled like cheap carpet cleaner and stale coffee, but inside, it was different. Colder. Quieter. I took one step in, then another, my heels too loud against polished marble, echoing in a room that was never meant to echo. I should have turned back. I know that now. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you don't understand the rules of the world you're stepping into. I thought it was just another hotel room. Maybe someone else's mistake. Maybe mine. I even lifted my phone to double-check the number, squinting at the tiny screen like that could somehow fix what I'd already done. And then I saw him. He wasn't moving. Just standing there, like he had always been there, like the room had been built around him. Tall. Still. Watching. Not surprised. Not angry. Just aware. My breath caught halfway in my chest, like my body knew before my mind could catch up. There were others in the room too, shapes in the background, shadows that didn't speak or move, but everything about them felt deliberate, controlled, like they were part of something I didn't understand. My fingers tightened around my phone. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice thinner than I expected, like it didn't belong to me either. "I think I got the wrong room." No one answered. The silence stretched, heavy, pressing against my skin. I took a step back, then another, reaching for the door handle behind me without looking. If I could just leave, if I could pretend this never happened, maybe I could go back to being invisible, normal, safe. My hand brushed the metal. Cold. Real. I exhaled, just a little, and turned my body toward the hallway. Stop. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It slid through the air and wrapped around me like a command my body recognized before my mind did. My feet froze. Actually froze. I couldn't move even if I wanted to. Slowly, I turned back. He was closer now. I didn't see him move. I didn't hear footsteps. But the distance between us had disappeared like it never mattered. His eyes locked onto mine, steady, unreadable, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel seen in a way that wasn't safe. My heart slammed so hard it hurt, each beat echoing in my ears, drowning out everything else. "Please," I whispered, barely able to get the word out. "I won't say anything." I didn't see anything. His expression didn't change, not even a flicker, but something in the air shifted again, heavier this time, like a decision had already been made. "That's the problem," he said quietly, his voice low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't rush because it never had to. "You were never supposed to see anything." My fingers slipped from the door handle. The hallway behind me suddenly felt 1,000 miles away. And in that moment, standing in a room I was never meant to enter, staring at a man who didn't look like he believed in accidents, I realized something that made my stomach drop. This wasn't a mistake I could walk away from. And he wasn't going to let me try. My body would not listen to me. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the silence, not the way the room seemed to close in, but the fact that my legs refused to take another step toward the door. It was like something invisible had wrapped around my spine and held me in place. I forced myself to breathe, slow and quiet, like if I stayed calm enough, I might disappear back into the world I came from. "I made a mistake," I said again, a little steadier this time, even though my hands were shaking. "I will leave, and you will never see me again." His gaze did not move. It stayed fixed on me, like he was measuring something I could not understand. Then, almost casually, he reached into his jacket and pulled out my phone. I had not even realized I had dropped it. My stomach tightened as he turned it over in his hand, glancing at the cracked corner, the cheap case, the small details that suddenly felt too personal in a room like this. "Emily Carter," he said, reading my name off the screen like it belonged to him now. The sound of my name in his voice made something cold settle under my ribs. 24. Lives in Brooklyn. Works 2 jobs. My breath caught. "How do you know that?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He did not answer right away. Instead, he took one step closer, and I felt it, the shift in space, like the air itself moved with him. Not threatening, not loud, just certain. "Because I do not leave loose ends," he said quietly. The words were simple, but they landed heavier than anything he could have said. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am not a loose end. I am just someone who opened the wrong door." For a second, something flickered in his expression. Not softness. Not exactly. Just a pause. like he was considering the possibility of that being true. Then his eyes dropped briefly to my hands, still trembling, before lifting back to my face. "If that were true," he said, "you would already be gone." My heart skipped. The implications settled in slowly, piece by piece, until it felt impossible to ignore. I glanced toward the door again, instinctively, but this time I noticed it. A man standing just outside the frame, barely visible, his presence quiet but undeniable. Watching, waiting. My exit had never really been an option. I pressed my lips together, forcing myself not to panic. Panic would not help me here. Panic would only make me smaller, easier to dismiss. "Then what happens now?" I asked, the words coming out softer than I intended. He studied me for a long moment, like he was deciding something important, something that would change everything without me having any say in it. Then he stepped past me, close enough that I could feel the heat from his shoulder without him ever touching me. He opened the door behind me, but did not move aside. "Now," he said, his voice calm, controlled, "you stay where I can see you." I turned slowly, my pulse loud in my ears, the hallway beyond the door suddenly feeling even farther away than before. This was not about being trapped by a locked door. This was something else, something quieter, something worse. And as I stood there, caught between the world I knew and the one I had just stepped into, I realized the truth I had been trying to avoid since the moment I walked in. I had not just entered the wrong room. I had stepped into someone else's rules. And he was the one who wrote them. The door stayed open, but I did not move. That was the strange part. Freedom was right there, just a few feet away, the hallway stretching out like nothing had changed, like I could still walk back into my life and pretend this never happened. But my feet stayed planted on the marble, like I understood something my mind had not caught up to yet. Leaving was not about distance. It was about permission, and I did not have it. I wrapped my arms around myself without thinking, trying to keep the shaking under control. The room felt colder now, or maybe it was just me. "You said I can leave," I said quietly, even though I already knew the answer. He turned slightly, just enough for his profile to catch the light. Sharp lines. Controlled expression. Nothing wasted. "I said you can stand by the door," he corrected. Not harsh. Not raised. Just precise. My throat tightened. Of course. Every word mattered here. Every detail. I glanced past him into the hallway again, watching a couple walk by in the distance, laughing about something small, something normal. They did not look in. They did not notice me. To them, this was just another door in a long hotel corridor. To me, it felt like the edge of something I could not cross anymore. Why me? The question came out before I could stop it. It sounded smaller than I meant it to, almost fragile. He did not answer right away. Instead, he moved toward a table near the window, picking up a glass of water like this was any other night, any other conversation. The city lights outside stretched across the skyline, bright and distant, reminding me how far away everything familiar suddenly felt. "Because you are still here," he said finally. I frowned, confusion cutting through the fear for a second. That does not make sense. He looked at me then, really looked, and for a brief moment, I felt like I was being pulled apart piece by piece, every thought, every reaction laid out in front of him. "Most people," he said slowly, "would be crying by now, or begging, or trying to run." I swallowed. Maybe I am just in shock. Maybe, he agreed, but his tone suggested he did not believe that was the whole truth. I shifted my weight, forcing myself to stay steady under his gaze. Or maybe I just do not understand what is happening. That seemed to interest him more than anything else I had said. He set the glass down with quiet precision and took a step closer, not enough to crowd me, but enough that I could not ignore the space between us anymore. "You walked into a room where you were not invited," he said. "You heard things you were not meant to hear. You saw people you were not meant to see." His voice stayed calm, but each sentence landed heavier than the last. "That makes you part of something now, whether you want to be or not." My chest tightened. I do not want to be part of anything. That is not how this works. The simplicity of his answer hit harder than anything else. I looked down at my hands, still not completely steady, and realized how small they looked against the polished floor, against this entire world that felt too large, too controlled. "Then what do you want from me?" I asked, barely above a whisper. For the first time, there was a pause. Not hesitation, not uncertainty, just a moment where he seemed to consider something beyond the immediate situation. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but no less firm. I want to decide if you are a risk, he said. The words sent a quiet chill through me. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. I lifted my head slowly, meeting his eyes despite everything in me telling me not to. And if I am? Another pause. This one shorter. Then you will not be walking out of that door tonight. The hallway behind him suddenly felt like a memory instead of an option. And for the first time since I stepped into this room, I realized something that made my heartbeat slow instead of race. This was not about fear anymore. It was about survival. And survival meant understanding him before he decided what to do with me. Time slowed in a way that did not feel natural. Not calm. Not peaceful. Just stretched thin, like every second was being pulled apart so I could feel all of it at once. I forced myself to stand straighter, even though everything inside me still felt unsteady. If he was deciding whether I was a risk, then I could not afford to look like one. Fear was expected. Panic was predictable. But calm made people pause. Then decide, I said quietly, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. His eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in interest, like I had shifted something he did not expect. The silence that followed was different this time. Not heavy, not pressing, measured. He took another step closer, slow enough that I could track it, controlled enough that it felt intentional in every way. You are either very brave, he said, or you do not understand your situation. I held his gaze, even though my heartbeat was loud enough to make my ears ring. Maybe both. Something almost like approval flickered across his expression, gone as quickly as it appeared. He turned slightly, glancing toward the men in the background, and with nothing more than a subtle movement of his hand, they stepped back. Not out of the room, just far enough that their presence faded into the edges again. It was the first time I realized how much space he controlled without saying a word. Come here, he said. Not a request. Not loud. Just certain. Every instinct told me not to move. To stay by the door, to keep whatever distance I had left. But distance had never been real in this room. I took a step forward. Then another. Each one felt heavier than the last, like I was walking deeper into something I could not see the end of. When I stopped a few feet in front of him, the air felt different again. Warmer. Tighter. Focused. He studied me in silence, his eyes moving just enough to take in the details I wished he would not notice. The worn edges of my jacket. The faint crease in my sleeve from working too many hours. The small things that gave away a life that did not belong anywhere near his. You work too much, he said suddenly. I blinked, caught off guard. What? 2 jobs, he continued, like he had already decided to read me out loud. Late hours. Not enough sleep. My throat tightened. You do not know me. I know enough. His voice stayed calm, but there was something underneath it now. Not threat. Not exactly. Just certainty. People like you survive by staying invisible. The words landed harder than anything else he had said, because they were true. I looked away for a second, just long enough to break the intensity of his gaze. And now I am not invisible anymore, I said. No, he replied. Now you are standing in front of me. The weight of that settled between us, quiet but undeniable. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to think past the fear, past the confusion, into something clearer. Then let me go back to being invisible, I said. You will never see me again. He was quiet for a moment, not dismissing me, not agreeing, just considering. Then he reached out, not to grab, not to force, just enough to tilt my chin slightly upward so I had no choice but to meet his eyes again. The touch was brief, controlled, and somehow more unsettling than anything else that had happened. That is not how this works anymore, he said softly. My breath caught, the words settling deep before I could stop them, because I understood what he meant. This was not a situation I could undo. Not with promises. Not with distance. Not with time. I had stepped into something that did not forget. And as I stood there, caught in his world, I realized the most dangerous part was not what he might do. It was the fact that he had not decided yet. And somehow, that felt worse. The space between us did not feel the same anymore. It was no longer distance. It was something charged, something waiting. I did not move even after his hand dropped away from my chin, but I felt it, the echo of that brief contact lingering longer than it should have. My breath came slower now, more controlled, like my body was starting to understand that panic would not help me here. Thinking might. So what happens while you decide? I asked, keeping my voice even though the question carried more weight than I wanted to admit. He turned slightly, as if the answer was already somewhere in the room, already set in motion before I had even asked. "You stay," he said simply, "and you listen." A faint tension slipped into my chest. Listen to what? He did not answer directly. Instead, he moved toward the window again, looking out over the city like everything below belonged to him in ways I could not see. The lights reflected faintly in the glass, turning his silhouette into something sharper, more distant. Then his phone vibrated. The sound was quiet, but it shifted the entire room. One of the men in the background straightened slightly, alert without being obvious. Adrian glanced at the screen, his expression unreadable, then answered with a single word. "Yes." His voice changed. Not louder, not harsher, just colder, more precise. I could not hear the other side of the conversation, but I could feel it. The tension moved through the room like a current, subtle but undeniable. "No," he said after a moment. "That will not happen." A pause. His jaw tightened just enough that I noticed. "Then fix it." He ended the call without another word, the silence that followed heavier than before. I swallowed, unsure if I should speak, unsure if I should stay completely still. This was a different version of him now. Not the man who had studied me, not the one who spoke in measured calm. This was something sharper, more focused, more dangerous in a way I could not fully define. He turned back toward me slowly, and for the first time since I walked into that room, I saw something shift in his eyes. Not anger. Not exactly. Just calculation, moving faster now. "It seems," he said, "your timing was worse than I thought." My stomach tightened. I did not plan any of this. "I know." The certainty in his voice made me pause. He stepped closer again, but this time there was less space between his movements, less patience in the distance he allowed. "But now it matters." I shook my head slightly, trying to keep up, trying to understand what I had stepped into without being told directly. "You said you were deciding if I am a risk." "I am." And the word slipped out before I could stop it. His gaze held mine, steady, unblinking. And the situation just changed. My pulse picked up again, but not with panic. With awareness. Something had shifted beyond me. Something larger than just my mistake. I glanced toward the door instinctively, then back at him. "That phone call," I said carefully. "It has something to do with me, does it not?" He did not answer right away. Instead, he studied me again, like he was reassessing every detail, every reaction, fitting me into a different equation than before. "You are paying attention," he said quietly. It was not a question. "I have to," I replied. "If I do not understand what is happening, I cannot survive it." The words hung in the air, more honest than I intended, more revealing than I could take back. Something in his expression shifted again. Not softer, but less distant. "Good," he said. Just that. One word. But it carried something new. Approval. Or maybe recognition. He turned slightly, glancing toward the door where the man outside still stood, silent and waiting. Then his attention returned to me, sharper now, more decided. "Then listen carefully," he said. "Because from this point forward, what happens next depends on whether you can keep up." The weight of that settled into my chest, slow and heavy. Not a threat. Not exactly. Something else. Something that felt like a line I had just been pushed across without realizing it. And standing there, caught between fear and something dangerously close to clarity, I realized this was no longer about getting out. It was about what I would become if I stayed. The room felt smaller after his words. Not physically. The walls had not moved, the ceiling had not lowered, but something about the air shifted, like it was pressing closer, demanding more attention, more awareness. I straightened slightly, forcing myself to focus, because he was watching for it now. Not fear. Not hesitation. Understanding. "Then tell me what changed," I said, keeping my voice steady, even though every instinct told me to stay quiet. His eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary, measuring, deciding if I had earned the answer or if I was reaching too far too fast. Then he moved again, this time toward the table near the center of the room, where a sleek tablet rested beside a stack of papers that looked untouched but important. He tapped the screen once, and the faint glow illuminated his face just enough to make the sharp lines of his expression stand out even more. "Someone made a mistake tonight," he said. The words were calm, but there was something underneath them that made my stomach tighten. "And now people are looking for it." I swallowed. "For what?" He glanced up at me, and for the first time, I felt like I was no longer just being observed. I was being included. Carefully, deliberately. For anything that does not belong, he said. The meaning settled in slowly, like a realization I did not want to accept. I looked down at myself without thinking, at my worn shoes, my jacket that still carried the faint smell of rain from earlier, the details that screamed I was not supposed to be here. That would be me, I said quietly. Yes, he replied without hesitation. The honesty hit harder than anything else could have. I exhaled slowly, forcing my thoughts into something sharper, something useful. So if they are looking for someone like me, why am I still here? He set the tablet down with quiet precision and stepped closer again, stopping just within that same invisible boundary he always seemed to control. Because, he said, right now, you are safer where I can see you than anywhere else in this building. My heart skipped, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what that implied. Safer from who? He did not answer directly. Instead, his gaze shifted briefly toward the door, toward the man who had not moved this entire time, then back to me. From anyone who would ask the wrong questions, he said. The room fell quiet again, but it was not empty silence. It was full of things unsaid, things I was starting to understand without being told. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to him, piecing it together in fragments that did not quite form a full picture, but were enough to make one thing clear. I was no longer invisible, and now that someone else might notice me, I had become a problem. I looked back at him, holding his gaze a little more firmly this time. Then what do? I asked. His expression did not soften, but something in it shifted again, like he had been waiting for that question. You stay close, he said. You do not speak unless I tell you to. And you pay attention to everything. The instructions were simple. Too simple. But the way he said them made it clear they were not optional. I nodded once. Okay. The word felt small compared to everything happening around it, but it was all I had. He watched me for another moment, like he was confirming something only he could see, then turned slightly toward the door. We are leaving, he said. The words cut through the room, immediate and final. My pulse jumped again as I glanced toward the hallway, toward the world I thought I knew, now feeling more distant than ever. Leaving where? I asked before I could stop myself. He paused just long enough to look back at me, his eyes steady, unreadable. Somewhere no one will think to look for you, he said. The weight of that settled deep, heavier than anything before it. Because it was no longer about this room. It was about everything beyond it. And as I took a small step toward him without being told, I realized I had already started following his rules without even noticing. The hallway felt louder than it should have. Not with noise, but with movement. Every step echoed differently out here, sharper, more exposed, like the world had shifted from something contained to something unpredictable. I stayed close to him without needing to be told again, matching his pace as we moved forward, his presence just ahead of me like a line I could not cross and could not fall behind. The man who had been standing by the door fell in behind us, silent, precise, like he had been waiting for this exact moment. I kept my eyes forward, but I noticed everything. The way people stepped aside without being asked. The way conversations softened as we passed. The way no one looked directly at him for too long. Power did not announce itself here. It was understood. Do not look nervous, Adrian said quietly, not turning, not slowing. I am trying not to, I replied, keeping my voice just as low. Trying is visible. The correction was immediate. Controlled. I took a slow breath, adjusting my posture, forcing my shoulders to relax even though my pulse had started climbing again. Better, he said after a moment, and something about that single word made my chest tighten in a different way. Not fear. Something sharper. Awareness. We reached the elevator at the end of the hallway, the doors already open as if they had been waiting for him. Of course they had. Nothing here seemed accidental. He stepped inside first. I followed without hesitation. The man behind us remained just outside, holding his position as the doors slid closed with a quiet, final sound that felt louder than anything else so far. The moment the elevator sealed, the silence changed. It was no longer shared space. It was contained. Private. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders slipping just slightly now that there were no eyes on us. Where are we going? I asked, keeping my voice steady, even though the question carried more weight than I wanted to admit. He did not answer right away. Instead, He pressed a button without looking, his movements as precise as everything else he did. Somewhere controlled, he said finally. Somewhere predictable. I let that settle, trying to read between the lines, trying to understand what he was not saying. And this place is not. He glanced at me briefly, just enough for me to catch the shift in his expression. Nothing is predictable once someone starts asking questions. The elevator continued its smooth descent, each passing floor marked by a soft tone that felt too calm compared to everything happening around it. I watched the numbers change, focusing on something simple, something steady, because everything else felt like it was moving too fast. You said I am safer with you, I said after a moment. Does that mean I am in danger without you? He turned his head slightly, studying me again with that same unreadable focus. It means, he said slowly, that right now, you are connected to me. The words landed deeper than anything else. Connected. Not protected. Not hidden. Connected. I looked away, processing that, feeling the weight of it settle into something real. Because connection meant something else too. It meant there was no clean way out. The elevator slowed, then stopped with a soft mechanical sound. The doors slid open to a dimly lit underground level, quieter than the floors above, the air cooler, heavier. A sleek black car waited just beyond the doors, engine running, headlights low and steady. Adrian stepped forward without hesitation. I followed again, my movements automatic now, like I had already accepted a path I did not choose. The driver opened the rear door the moment we approached. Adrian paused just long enough to look at me, his gaze steady, deliberate. Stay close, he said. I nodded once and slid into the seat beside him, the leather cool against my skin. The door closed behind us with a soft, final click. The outside world disappeared. The car began to move. And as the city lights faded, behind tinted glass, I realized something that settled deep in my chest with quiet certainty. I was not just leaving the building. I was leaving everything familiar behind, and I had no idea if I would ever find my way back. The car moved smoothly, almost too smoothly, like the world outside had been muted the second the doors closed. I watched the city through the tinted window, but it did not feel like the same city anymore. The lights blurred together, distant, untouchable, like something I used to belong to but no longer did. No one spoke. The driver focused on the road. Adrian sat beside me, still, composed, like motion did not affect him the way it affected everything else. I folded my hands in my lap, more to give them something to do than anything else, and focused on my breathing. In, out, slow, controlled, the way he expected. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time felt strange here, stretched and compressed at the same time. You are thinking too loudly, Adrian said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet without raising in volume. I turned slightly, caught off guard. I did not say anything. You did not need to. His gaze shifted toward me, steady, observant. Your shoulders are tense again. I exhaled slowly, forcing them to relax. I am trying to understand what is happening, I admitted. Understanding comes after observation, he said. Right now you watch. I nodded once, taking that in, even though part of me wanted to ask more, to push, to get answers while I still could. But I stopped myself. He had been clear. I watched. The streets outside changed gradually, from crowded avenues to quieter roads, the buildings growing taller, cleaner, more controlled. Less noise, less unpredictability. The car turned into a private drive without slowing, passing through gates that opened before we even reached them. Of course they did. Nothing here waited. Everything anticipated. The car came to a stop in front of a building that did not need a sign to explain what it was. Glass, steel, and silence. Lights on, but not bright. Controlled, like everything else around him. The driver stepped out first, opening Adrian's door, then mine. Cool air brushed against my skin as I stepped out. The night quieter here, heavier somehow. Adrian moved forward without hesitation. I followed, my steps matching his without thinking. Inside, the lobby was empty. No receptionist. No guests. Just polished floors and soft lighting that made every sound echo just enough to remind me how alone we were. Where is everyone? I asked before I could stop myself. They are where they need to be, he replied without looking back. That answer did not help, but it told me enough. This place did not operate like the world I knew. We crossed the lobby and entered another elevator, this one smaller, more private. The doors closed behind us, sealing off the outside again. I shifted slightly, the weight of everything settling in again now that we had stopped moving. Is this where I stay? I asked quietly. He glanced at me, just once. For now. The elevator moved quickly, smooth and silent, until it stopped on a floor that felt even quieter than the last. The doors opened to a long hallway, dimly lit, lined with doors that all looked the same. No numbers, no signs, just choices I did not understand. Adrian stepped out first. I followed again. At the third door, he stopped, reached into his pocket, unlocked it with a small, precise movement. Then he stepped aside, just enough for me to see inside. Go in, he said. I hesitated for half a second, my instincts catching up, warning me that this was another line I could not uncross. But hesitation did not belong here. I stepped inside. The room was simple, clean, quiet. A bed, a chair, a window overlooking the city I no longer felt part of. I turned back toward him, my pulse steady but heavy. And if I try to leave? The question came out softer than I intended, but it held everything I needed to know. He met my gaze without hesitation, his expression unchanged, controlled, certain. You will not, he said. Not a threat, not raised, just a fact. And somehow, that made it harder to argue with than anything else he could have said. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than anything else in the room. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, half expecting it to open again, half hoping it would. It did not. The silence that followed felt different from before. Not heavy, not tense, just still, like the room itself was waiting to see what I would do next. I took a slow breath and turned away, letting my eyes move across the space more carefully this time. Everything was exactly where it should be. Nothing out of place. Nothing personal. It did not feel like a room someone lived in. It felt like a room someone was placed in. I walked toward the window, my steps quiet against the polished floor, and looked out at the city below. The lights were still there. The movement. The life. But it felt distant now, like I was looking at something through glass that I could not touch anymore. I pressed my fingers lightly against the cool surface, grounding myself in something real. This was still New York. I was still me. That had not changed. Not yet. A soft sound behind me made me turn. The door had not opened, but something had shifted. A small panel near the wall lit up briefly, then went dark again. I frowned slightly, stepping closer, realizing it was not decoration. It was control. Everything here was controlled. I let out a quiet breath, forcing my thoughts to settle into something clearer. Panic would not help. Fear would not change anything. I needed to think the way he did. Calm. Observant. Precise. I crossed the room slowly, noting the placement of everything, the absence of anything unnecessary. No clutter. No distractions. Just function. Just purpose. Even the silence felt intentional. I stopped near the center of the room and turned slowly, taking it all in again, this time with a different perspective. Not as someone trapped, as someone being watched. Because I was. I could feel it. Not directly, not obviously, but enough to know that nothing I did here would go unnoticed. You wanted me to pay attention, I said quietly, more to myself than to anyone else. So I will. The words steadied me in a way I did not expect. Because for the first time since I stepped into that hotel room, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not confusion, something sharper. Awareness. I moved toward the chair and sat down slowly, my hands resting in my lap again. But this time they were not shaking. I looked at the door once more, then back at the window, then around the room. Memorizing, learning, adapting. Because that was the only thing I could control now. Time. Passed. I was not sure how much. Minutes. Maybe longer. The silence did not change, but I did. The tension in my shoulders eased. My breathing slowed. My thoughts sharpened. By the time I heard the faint click at the door again, I was already looking at it. Ready. The handle turned slowly, deliberately, and the door opened just enough for him to step inside. Adrian paused just inside the frame, his gaze finding me immediately, taking in everything in a single glance. Not just where I was, but how I was. The way I sat, the way I held myself, the way I looked back at him without flinching this time. Something shifted in his expression. Small, almost invisible, but it was there. Good, he said quietly. Just one word. But it carried more weight than anything else he had said before. I stood slowly, meeting his gaze fully now, no hesitation left in the space between us. I am learning, I replied. His eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary. Then he stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him with the same quiet finality as before. "You will need to," he said. I felt the words settle, not as a warning this time, but as something else, something closer to truth. Because standing there, in a room that was never meant to be mine, looking at a man who controlled everything around him without effort, I realized something that changed everything again. I had walked into his world by accident, but staying in it, that was no longer an accident at all.